Let me start by asking the panel, how many of you have actually worked as a licensed truck driver in your lives? Any of you? I have. And I can tell you from personal experience that the level of stress on a truck driver goes up in direct proportion to what's going on in their workplace environment. If you're hauling grain during harvest season in Iowa, you have a lot more stress on you than you do if you're hauling it on a summer day. And one of the concerns I have is that we're really talking about two different things here today. The first four witnesses on the panel, called by the majority, are making a common point, which is that the rules that are being proposed are bad for business. You all agree with that point, don't you? Okay? Well, in an ideal world, the best rule for business would be no hours of service limitation, where you were free to set your own time frame, and yet you're shaking your head, Mr. Nagel, because you know there's a problem with that. Because there are backside costs, liability costs, that will come if we don't have some reasonable restriction on hours of duty. Is that correct? So what we're really arguing about is whether the rule that's been proposed or the rule that's in place make more sense for the purpose that this agency was set up to address. And if you look at that purpose, it is not called the Federal Motor Carrier Profit Administration. It's called the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and it's to set up the rules of the road that give people a level playing field that protect both the interest of the people who want to haul commerce across the roads of this country, which I was proud to do, and also protect the consumers who use that same highway and may not be involved in that system. Now, Mr. Miller, you made the point that one of the problems facing the industry, which I am acutely aware of, is a shortage of qualified, safe drivers. Do you remember saying that? Now, here's what I don't understand. We're in a recession now. There are a lot of people looking for work, 9% unemployment in this country. Why is the industry not able to find enough qualified, safe drivers if that is the case?
Sir, I don't have a good explanation for you. I can tell you that we are a premium driving operation. We operate a safe, legal fleet. We very rarely bump the 11 hours. However, I go through an average of 500 applications to put a qualified driver in my truck. And that's my concern, that people will be forced to put drivers that are not qualified and that are unsafe on the road.
And that's my point. I'm as sympathetic as you can believe. One of the problems is that there is a huge shortage of qualified drivers. And I think economists would tell us that perhaps one of the reasons for that shortage is that people looking for work do not find the workplace conditions and the pay worth the risk of trying to become qualified to drive a truck, which I think is an honorable and noble occupation, and one I was proud to be part of. But if we're looking at one of the reasons that may be contributing to that, I would argue it could have something to do with the hours of service requirement. And one of the things we know, Mr. Jasny and Dr. David, is this isn't unique to the trucking industry. We've seen the same issue come up in resident physician duty hours as people have become concerned that patient safety is being compromised by forcing resident physicians to work long hours without appropriate rest, and that compromises their ability to do their job effectively and impacts patient safety. So having heard the testimony today, I would like both of you to respond to the public safety concern and how that relates to the ability to hire qualified, safe drivers.
Mr. Braley, working conditions are always an important issue, certainly in shift work. We've seen that in studies of shift work all over the world. It's the working conditions. In these specific areas, if you look at the economist Michael Belzer wrote a book called Sweatshops on Wheels, and he's essentially saying that these are the modern-day sweatshops because of those working conditions, having to deliver just in time all the time, being under the gun, driving longer hours, and for many non-contract and non-union drivers, they're exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act.
Dr. David?
I mean, I don't think there's any question that reducing the amount of on-duty time would reduce the number of accidents. The question is how much, and is it worth it? I mean, we have a rule now that's more restricted than rules used to be. Those rules were more restrictive than the rules before that, and before that there weren't any rules. So the question is, where do you stop? And cost-benefit is one piece of information you can use to get there, as long as it's done properly.
And just so that I'm clear on one of the principal points of your testimony was that your economic analysis of the trade-offs between the current rule and the proposed rule is there were actual economic benefits to going to the proposed rule.
Well, there would be reduced crashes, but there would be increased costs. So I calculated that on net, the increased costs would outweigh the value of the reduced crashes. That is obviously sensitive to the assumptions you use and how restrictive the rule is. But under the assumptions the FMCSA uses, I calculated that the cost would be higher.
But the point that you also made is that those costs include opportunity. In other words, the added cost of transportation for these same goods and services could result in new jobs becoming available, taking people off of unemployment, making the taxpayers of this country pay less of that burden, and having those new employees paying into Social Security, Medicare, State, and Federal taxes as well.
I mean, this rule isn't going to be undone when we come out of a recession, so I would never recommend regulation in order to solve an unemployment problem. But in terms of the number of people actually driving trucks, that could change.
But the point is that this is an analysis about the trade-offs between safety on the one hand and what's a good business requirement on the other hand, and you're always going to have some of those trade-offs.
That's absolutely true.